I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. The morning I caught that message, life split cleanly in two, the life before, where I believed my marriage was solid, and the life after, where that certainty shattered. It was a Friday morning. She'd rushed out the door in a hurry, her phone buzzing and dinging on the kitchen counter, half covered by a stray napkin. I stood there, making coffee as usual, the scent warm and familiar. That was the first oddity, she rarely left her phone out of sight. But maybe she was distracted, another day on the run, trying to keep up with her busy life. We'd both been run ragged lately, work, bills, family obligations. That's just what happens in a long marriage, I'd told myself. The screen lit up with a message. I didn't mean to look, not really, but the words, "Can't wait to see you tonight," gleamed from the screen. My heart raced, every rational thought clouded by a storm of emotions I couldn't name. Who was Daniel, and why would he be looking forward to seeing my wife tonight? I tried to shrug it off, reminding myself not to jump to conclusions. It could be work-related, I whispered to myself, though it sounded hollow. But the words, the familiarity, they echoed the kind of excitement we used to have before life and routine drained some of the romance. Throughout the day, I couldn't stop thinking about that message. I tried to shake it off, but the suspicion grew like a dark seed in my mind, twisting, tangling with old memories of her recent behavior, the late work nights, the sudden, girls' weekends, the quiet withdrawal. It felt like a terrible cliché, the kind of story you overhear at the bar, shake your head, and think, thank God that isn't me. But this time, it was me, and the shock was sharp, settling deep in my chest. I decided to wait and confront her, try to understand, but my patience was thin. By the time she returned home, I had nearly talked myself out of saying anything. I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid, jumping to conclusions with barely a shred of evidence. But there was something about the way she walked in, that easy smile, like nothing in her world was wrong, that struck me. I waited until we sat down to dinner, a quick meal she'd thrown together. She hummed under her breath, the same tune she always did when she was distracted. "How was your day?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, my gaze locked on her face. She gave a nonchalant shrug, busy slicing vegetables. Same old," she replied, not meeting my eyes. I leaned forward, deciding to push a little. "So, who's Daniel?" Her hand froze mid-slice, just for a second, but that split second was enough to send my suspicions into overdrive. She looked up, a faint blush creeping over her cheeks. "Daniel?" She tried to brush it off with a quick laugh. "Oh, he's just a guy from work." "Just a guy from work," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Her smile faltered, the ease slipping away. "Yeah, he's in accounting." She went back to chopping, eyes fixed on the cutting board. "Nothing worth mentioning." But I could feel the truth brimming just beneath the surface, something unsaid that pulled and twisted at the seams of our life together. I wanted to confront her, demand an explanation, but a part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in us, held back. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was being irrational. That night, I barely slept. She lay beside me, breathing softly, her back turned. I listened to every movement, every shift, waiting for some sign that this was all in my head. But the doubt had taken root, and by morning, it was a fully formed conviction. I needed answers, proof. I had to know. The following week, I started doing things I'd never imagined myself doing. One afternoon, I found myself in the dimly lit office of a private investigator, a man who looked like he had seen the worst sides of marriage for far too many years. "Infidelity cases are tricky," he said, sliding a thin manila folder across the desk. "I'll gather what I can, messages, photos, whatever there is to find." I hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. Hiring someone to follow my wife. It felt wrong, invasive, but the alternative, living in the dark, was worse. I needed to know the truth, whatever it was, and this seemed the only way. The investigator worked fast, and over the next few days, I received snippets of information, a photo of her leaving work late, a dinner reservation for two at a small restaurant outside town, the same man's face showing up again and again in her proximity. Each image was a punch to the gut, a blow to every ounce of trust I'd ever placed in her. It was like watching a horror film unravel, one where the main character, me, was helpless, just along for the ride as the reality of betrayal unfolded in brutal clarity. Days turned into weeks, and with each piece of evidence, I felt myself slipping further away from her, from the life we'd built. Every time I saw her, I wanted to confront her, demand answers, but a strange numbness took over, a hollow acceptance that this was happening, that the woman I loved had chosen someone else, a secret life hidden from me. Then, one night, the investigator handed me the final piece. "Here's everything," he said, sliding a small USB drive across the table. "You might want to watch this alone." I sat in my car, gripping the drive, feeling like I was about to open Pandora's box. And in a way, I was. The video showed them together in a small cafe, sharing looks I hadn't seen her give in years. They laughed, touched hands across the table, as though they were in a world where I didn't exist. The final image burned into my mind, her smiling up at him with a look of adoration, the kind that once belonged only to me. I closed my eyes, letting the betrayal settle in, the painful truth finally laid bare. There was no going back now, no way to unsee what I'd seen or pretend that this could be forgiven. But I also knew that simply walking away wasn't enough. I needed her to feel the same loss, the same heartache she'd inflicted on me. If she thought she could just move on, carry on with her secret life while I faded quietly into the background, she was sorely mistaken. The final piece of my plan formed that night, a cold, calculated decision to reveal her lies to everyone she'd been hiding them from. She thought she could play with my life like it was nothing, but I was about to show her that she'd made a grave mistake. The night after I watched the video, I couldn't stop reliving that scene, the two of them, looking at each other like they were the only people in the world. It was as if my entire marriage had been a sham, a play put on just for show, with me as the unwitting fool. Part of me wanted to storm in and confront her right then and there, to unleash every bit of hurt and anger pent up inside me. But another part, the colder, calculating side that had been growing stronger with each revelation, told me to wait. This wasn't just going to be a confrontation. It was going to be an exposure, something that would tear her carefully crafted world apart, just like she'd torn mine. The next morning, she acted as if everything was perfectly normal, like she hadn't just spent the evening in the arms of another man. She greeted me with a soft, "Good morning," her eyes warm, her demeanor calm, as though the weight of her betrayal didn't exist. I managed to keep my composure. I looked her in the eye and said, "Let's have a party this weekend. Something with all our close friends and family." Her expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of something behind her gaze. Maybe guilt, maybe a touch of fear. But then she smiled, regaining her composure. "Of course," she said. "That sounds nice." It was the first time I'd lied to her directly, and it felt strangely freeing. I watched her move through the house, making preparations, oblivious to what was coming. She spent the next few days arranging the guest list, calling our friends, choosing a caterer. I could see her slipping back into her role as the perfect wife, as if she could somehow wash away the betrayal with small acts of kindness. It was almost laughable, the way she pretended, as if none of it would catch up with her. I spent those days planning meticulously. I contacted the private investigator again, asking for a favor, a live feed of the footage from the cafe, the photos, the texts, all of it neatly compiled, ready to display. He didn't question my request, and within hours, everything was organized, ready to play on the big screen we'd recently set up in the living room for movie nights. It felt fitting, somehow, that this would be the last thing it was used for. By Saturday, everything was ready. Our house was buzzing with the sounds of friends and family, the clink of glasses, the hum of conversation. My wife moved through the crowd effortlessly, laughing, smiling, engaging everyone in her orbit. She was the picture of charm, the center of attention, the woman everyone admired. Watching her now, it was hard to believe that the same person was capable of such deceit. I bided my time, waiting until the energy in the room was at its peak, the conversations flowing, the laughter filling the space. I wanted everyone to be settled, to be fully engrossed in the night, so that what was coming would hit with maximum impact. Finally, as dessert was being served, I tapped a glass to get everyone's attention. The room quieted, eyes turning to me, some surprised at my uncharacteristic need for the spotlight. My wife looked over, her expression curious, perhaps a little wary, as I cleared my throat. I just wanted to say a few words, I began, my voice calm and steady. About my wife. I could see her eyes widen slightly, a flicker of nervousness darting across her face. Most of you know that we've been married for 15 years, I continued, my gaze never leaving hers. And over those years, we've built a life together. A good life, or so I thought. There was a murmur in the crowd, a few awkward glances exchanged. She shifted uncomfortably, her smile beginning to fade as the tone of my words sank in. But, I said, a slight edge creeping into my voice, sometimes, people aren't who they seem. Sometimes, the people closest to us have secrets. I paused, letting the tension build, watching her expression darken with fear as she realized where this was going. So, in honor of that honesty, I said, gesturing to the screen, I thought I'd share a little movie with all of you. I clicked a remote, and the lights dimmed as the screen flickered to life. Her face went pale, her hands clenching at her sides as the first images appeared, the cozy cafe, her and Daniel sitting close, their hands entwined across the table. There was a sharp intake of breath from someone in the crowd, and then silence, a thick, suffocating silence as the video played on. Each scene unfolded like a nightmare, snapshots of their secret life together, their stolen moments, all laid bare before the people she loved most. Her mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hands, her friends exchanged horrified looks, her father glared at her, his face red with fury and shame. My wife's face was frozen, her eyes locked on the screen, a look of pure panic etched into her features. When the video ended, the silence was absolute. She looked at me, her face a mask of horror, and for a moment, I felt a flash of pity. But it was quickly extinguished by the months of lies, the betrayals she had forced me to endure in silence. How could you, she whispered, her voice barely audible, tears welling up in her eyes. How could I? I repeated, feeling the bitterness rise up. How could I? How could you, for months, hide this from me, from everyone here, as if our life together meant nothing? The room erupted in whispers, her friends and family murmuring in shock, disbelief, and judgment. She looked around, her face pale, her carefully constructed life crumbling around her. She stumbled backward, retreating from the room, but her mother intercepted her, fury etched in her face. Is this true? Her mother demanded. Tell me this isn't real. Her only response was a strangled sob, her hands covering her face as she pushed past, fleeing up the stairs, leaving the party behind. The whispers continued, the looks of disappointment and betrayal directed not at me, but at her. She was alone in her disgrace, exposed before the people she valued most. And it was exactly what she deserved. The party quickly dissolved into chaos. Friends left in awkward silence, her family barely able to meet my gaze as they hurriedly gathered their things, their faces tight with a mix of anger and humiliation. I watched them go, the remnants of the night strewn around the house, the silence settling like dust in the wake of a storm. When the house was finally empty, I stood alone in the living room, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. She was upstairs, no doubt hiding in shame, trying to piece together what was left of her dignity. I didn't follow her, didn't feel the need to say anything more. She'd wanted secrets. Now she could have them, in the emptiness of a house that no longer felt like home. The revenge was complete, the betrayal laid bare, and as I stood there in the quiet aftermath, I realized something. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt free. The hours after the party were some of the longest I'd ever endured. The house had been emptied of guests, but the silence was anything but peaceful. It was heavy, charged, filled with the weight of what had just transpired. She was still upstairs, hiding from me, from the truth that had exploded in front of everyone she cared about. A part of me wanted to go up there, to demand she explain herself, to ask why she'd chosen this path. But another part, the deeper, colder part, was satisfied knowing she had no easy answers left to give. When I finally went upstairs, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, head buried in her hands. She looked up when I entered, her eyes rimmed red and swollen from crying, her face pale in the dim light. I almost didn't recognize her. This woman, so shattered and raw, was a stranger to me now. Why? I asked, the single word hanging in the air between us. She looked at me, her gaze empty, like a well that had run dry. I don't know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know why I did it. I scoffed, feeling the anger rise up again. That's not an answer, I said. You destroyed everything we had, every promise you made to me, to us. And you don't even know why. She looked down, biting her lip, as if searching for the right words. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she murmured. At first, it was just an escape, a way to feel something different, something, her voice caught, and she trailed off. Something exciting. Something forbidden. I spat, my patience wearing thin. Was it really worth it? She shook her head, unable to meet my gaze. No, she whispered. It wasn't worth it. None of it was. I don't even know who I am anymore. The words sounded hollow, almost rehearsed, as though she were trying to distance herself from the reality of her actions. I watched her, feeling a strange sense of detachment, as though I were observing her from some far-off place. This was the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built a life with, and now, looking at her, I felt nothing but a vast emptiness. Do you know how many times I've replayed the past few months in my head? I asked. All the nights you came home late, the excuses, the lies. And I kept giving you the benefit of the doubt. I kept telling myself that you would never do something like this. That you loved me. That I could trust you. I paused, the bitterness thick in my throat. Do you have any idea what it's like to realize you've been living a lie? She looked away, silent, her shoulders hunched in defeat. I know you're hurt, she said softly. But I still love you, even if I made a horrible mistake. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Love? Don't talk to me about love. Love doesn't do what you did. Love doesn't turn into deceit. You think love is just words you can throw around to cover up the mess you've made? A long silence stretched between us. She looked down, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I need you to understand that I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for it to go this far. So what did you mean for it to be? I asked, the anger simmering just below the surface. A little fling. Something you could brush under the rug when you got bored. Did you think you could just come home and act like nothing happened, while I sat here, oblivious, believing everything was perfect? She flinched, the words hitting her like a slap. For a moment, she opened her mouth as if to say something, but then she closed it, her shoulders sagging. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The anger, the bitterness, it was all-consuming. But beneath it was something deeper, something that hurt even more, the sense of betrayal, the feeling that the life I thought we'd built together had been nothing more than a mirage. You threw away everything for a man who meant nothing to you, I said, my voice cold. You destroyed our life for a thrill, a secret you thought you could keep. And now, you want me to just understand? You want me to somehow pretend that this was just some terrible mistake that we can fix? She didn't respond, her face crumpling as fresh tears filled her eyes. I watched her for a long moment, feeling the last remnants of my love for her slipping away. Whatever we'd had, whatever connection we'd shared, had been shattered beyond repair. "I want you to leave," I said finally, the words falling heavy and final. She looked up, shocked, as though she hadn't expected me to say it. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't make me go. We can work through this. We can fix it, I know we can. I'll do whatever it takes." But I was done. The lies, the betrayal, the countless moments where she'd chosen someone else over me, it was too much to bear. "No," I said firmly. "You chose this. You made your bed. Now you get to lie in it." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the wreckage of her choices. I spent that night in the guest room, lying awake, my mind replaying everything over and over, the anger and betrayal gnawing at me, keeping sleep at bay. I could still hear her muffled sobs through the walls, but they no longer moved me. If anything, they felt like justice, a faint echo of the pain she'd caused me. The next morning, she was gone. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter, a hasty scrawl of apologies and promises that meant nothing now. I read it once, then crumpled it in my fist, tossing it in the trash. It was over. Finally, brutally, over. The days that followed were strangely empty, a hollow calm settling over the house. I went through the motions, returning to work, keeping up with the daily routine, but everything felt different, like I was living in someone else's life. I caught myself reaching for my phone to text her, only to remember she was gone. I found traces of her everywhere, the faint scent of her perfume on a scarf, the way she'd organized the kitchen cabinets, her favorite mug sitting empty on the counter. Each one was a reminder, a ghost haunting the spaces we'd shared. I wanted to hate her, to curse her memory, but the truth was, I felt more empty than angry. She'd left a void that nothing seemed able to fill, a hollow ache that no amount of work or distraction could ease. One evening, a week after she left, I received a text. It was her. Just a simple message, "I'm sorry." No explanations, no justifications, just 2 words. I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering over the delete button. Part of me wanted to respond, to let her know just how deeply she'd hurt me, but another part knew it would make no difference. She'd already made her choice. Responding wouldn't change anything. Eventually, I deleted the message, a strange sense of relief washing over me as I did. It was like closing a door, locking away the memories and the pain, finally allowing myself to move forward. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the hurt began to fade. I started reconnecting with friends, throwing myself into work, finding solace in the simple, steady rhythm of daily life. The wounds were still there, raw and unhealed, but they no longer consumed me. I was learning, piece by piece, how to live again. One night, as I was cleaning up the house, I found her wedding ring, tucked away in a drawer. I held it in my hand, the weight of it strange and unfamiliar. I thought about the promises we'd made, the life we'd shared, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of something close to sadness. But it passed quickly, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. I placed the ring in an envelope, sealed it, and set it aside to return to her. It was a small, symbolic act, a final goodbye to the life we'd once shared. And as I did, I felt a glimmer of something new, a sense of freedom, a hint of hope, the faintest beginnings of a life beyond her betrayal. Months went by, and I found myself adapting to the rhythms of a new life. I'd learned to navigate the silence of the house, filling the emptiness with my own routines, my own peace. My anger and bitterness, once like raw edges on every memory, had softened with time. I had accepted what had happened and let go of her shadow. And I was finally ready to move forward. One evening, I got an unexpected call from an old college friend, Greg. "I've got an extra ticket to the basketball game tonight," he said. "Come on. You need to get out and live a little." I hesitated, caught off guard by the spontaneity, but he insisted, and I found myself agreeing. The game was a welcome distraction. It felt good to lose myself in the roar of the crowd, the energy of the arena. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was truly present. The past, my marriage, the betrayal, they seemed far away, distant memories. After the game, Greg and I grabbed a drink at a nearby bar. We talked and laughed, reminiscing about old times, the conversation light and easy. I hadn't laughed like that in ages. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to let go, to just enjoy the moment. Toward the end of the evening, I noticed a woman at the other end of the bar. She was laughing with a friend, her eyes bright, her smile wide. There was something familiar about her, something that drew me in. She caught me looking, and to my surprise, she held my gaze, her expression curious, a faint smile playing at her lips. Emboldened by the moment, I decided to approach her. "Hey," I said, feeling a little like an awkward teenager. "I couldn't help but notice you from over there. I'm enjoying myself for the first time in a long time, actually." She laughed, a warm, genuine sound, and introduced herself. Her name was Laura, and as we talked, I found myself captivated by her openness, her warmth. She had an ease about her, a way of drawing people in, making them feel seen. I told her a bit about my past year, the safe parts of it, and she listened without judgment, her gaze steady and kind. We exchanged numbers that night, and over the following weeks, Laura and I fell into a comfortable rhythm. We'd meet up for coffee, or a casual dinner, or a walk through the park, and I found myself looking forward to those moments, her company like a balm to the wounds I'd carried for so long. I was cautious, guarded even, but with each meeting, I felt myself letting go, allowing her into the corners of my life I'd once kept hidden. A few months later, on a brisk autumn evening, Laura invited me over to her apartment for dinner. She cooked, and we shared stories, laughed, and enjoyed the warmth of the evening. After dinner, as we sat on her couch, talking quietly, I felt the urge to share the full truth, to tell her everything about my past. "I need to tell you something," I began, my voice low. "I haven't been completely open with you about my past." She looked at me, her expression soft, encouraging me to continue. And so, I told her the story, the betrayal, the party, the way I'd exposed my ex-wife's affair in front of everyone. Laura listened quietly, her gaze never wavering, her face a mixture of understanding and sadness. When I finished, she reached over and took my hand, her touch grounding me. "I'm so sorry you went through that," she said softly. "But, it doesn't change anything for me." Her words were a relief, a reassurance that I hadn't even realized I needed. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free, unburdened. The months flew by, and Laura and I grew closer. I felt myself healing in ways I hadn't thought possible, each moment with her a step toward a future I could finally see. We moved in together, creating a life that was ours, filled with laughter, quiet mornings, and shared dreams. I was finally at peace. Then, one evening, as I was sorting through some old boxes in the garage, I found an envelope I didn't recognize, tucked away in a corner. It was weathered, the edges soft, as if it had been handled many times. Curiously, I opened it, unfolding a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was unfamiliar, delicate and slanted, and as I read the words, my heart stopped. "To my darling Laura," it began. "I know you'll probably never read this, but I need to write it anyway. I need you to know how much I love you, how deeply I regret what I did. I never meant to hurt you. You were my world, and I threw it away. I've spent every day since wondering if there's a way back, but I know you've moved on. I just hope you find happiness, real happiness, the kind we once shared. Forever yours, Daniel." The letter slipped from my hands, my mind spinning. Laura. Daniel. I stumbled back, replaying every conversation, every detail, every small, seemingly insignificant thing that had never quite added up. She had known my ex-wife's affair partner, but not from a distant story or from the sidelines. She had loved him, once, maybe even while he was seeing my wife. I could hardly breathe, the betrayal hitting me all over again, twisting everything I'd come to believe. That evening, when Laura came home, I confronted her. She didn't deny it. Her eyes filled with tears as she admitted it was true, that she had once been involved with Daniel, that she'd known about his affair with my ex-wife. She hadn't planned to fall for me, she insisted, hadn't meant to keep it a secret, but she'd been afraid to tell me, afraid of losing the life we'd built together. I didn't know how to tell you, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't want to lose you. I thought I could put it behind me, that it didn't matter anymore. I looked at her, feeling the weight of the betrayal settle in, colder and deeper than anything I'd felt before. All this time, I'd believed I'd found a new beginning, a chance to start over, but it had been rooted in yet another lie. I need time, I said, my voice hollow. I turned and left, the sound of her sobs following me out the door, haunting me as I walked into the night. In the end, I couldn't stay. The past had found me, woven itself into the fabric of my new life, and no matter how much I wanted to believe I could move beyond it, it was there, a shadow I could never escape. And so I left, leaving behind the remnants of 2 loves, 2 betrayals, and a life I could no longer trust. But as I walked away, the cool night air stinging my skin, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Maybe I'd never find peace, not truly. But I knew one thing for certain, I'd rather live alone in truth than with someone in a web of lies. And with that thought, I disappeared into the dark, free at last.